here we are once again at the Red House. We're at the lovely corner of Glenwood and Lunt. We're in the heart of Rogers Park. I'm Michael James. I'm your host for this morning's edition of Live from the Heartland Radio, brought to you every Saturday morning, 9 to 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time on WLUW 88.7 Chicago Sound Alliance. And it's always good to hear Jimi Hendrix. I get to hear him every Saturday morning. He welcomes us to the Red House, and we are the Heartland Cafe, and for many years now we've been bringing you this Live from the Heartland radio show. Today is the 1st of May in the year 2010, in the era of Barack Obama, and it is May Day. And as many of you know, May Day is an event that was started here in Chicago. It was workers standing up for their rights and making protests and making a case for justice. They've taken many forms over the years. Even during the Eisenhower period, you had a situation where they called it Law Day. They tried to capture it back from the people. But fortunately, it's still May Day, and in recent years, there's been a great resurgence around May Day with a lot of activists showing their colors, so to speak, and people mainly from Mexico have taken that day to make the case for immigration reform and for justice for all immigrants from wherever they may come. Those of you who are a little bit interested in Heartland history would want to know that today is the 34th anniversary of the first day we worked down the Heartland Cafe. It was May 1st in 1976 that Katie Hogan, myself, Michael James, Stormy Brown, and some of my kids were all here, along with Jean Brigman, who was Stormy's mom. We all gathered here at the corner of Glenwood and Lunt, and we started to tear apart what was once Lackey Steakhouse. It was a wonderful day, and unfortunately we did capture it on film, so someday you'll get to see that. So here we are with Live from the Heartland, our May Day show, and we have a number of guests who are trying to make it in here from out of town. One of them just showed up, and he is Paul Wozniak. Good morning to you, Paul.
Good morning, Michael.
Paul, you drove all night or all morning up from the great northern spot, Green Bay.
Yeah, from Green Bay, driven by my friend Elaine Conway.
I thought that you were living in San Francisco now.
Well, I was. I've had 5 addresses in the past year. It's just the nature of our times. Looking for work.
That's good. Get those miles. Use that credit card. Well, I go way back with Paul. Paul was a young, we would call them in those days greasers, people who were kind of long, they wore black leather jackets and baggy pants and A1 stay-press pants and combat boots or pointy-toed shoes, Italian knits or bandlon shirts, slicked back hair, all greased up, and not to be confused with a derogatory term from people from another land. And the greasers were, early on, were kind of conservative, we used to think, but back in the days of Rising Up Angry, we were trying to build alliances between Latinos and blacks and poor and working white people, and Paul was one of those young guys that came forward. Paul, what do you remember about the early days of Rising Up Angry?
Well, I've been thinking quite a bit about it, and I think you mentioned greasers were conservative. They indeed were conservative, even reactionary forces.
Yeah, they were kind of racist, some of them.
And oftentimes manipulated by reactionary forces, including those in the police department at the time, to be vigilantes, to cause trouble. And they got involved in things, I'm sure, like even the Chicago Convention, you know, taking justice into their own hands and trying to teach some hippies some law and order. I don't know if you know this story, but Carl Armstrong from Madison, who was involved in a lot of radical activities up there, tells of his first coming to Chicago in 1968 and running into some greasers who spoke with southern accents. And they accused him or asked, "Are you a yippie?" And he says, "Well, I'm not sure what a yippie is, but I guess maybe I am." And they picked him up and threw him into the river with his backpack. That was just the start of, well, I won't go into the long story there, but yeah. But the fact is I was just retelling James Tracy, who was writing a book with Amy, I forget her last name.
Amy Sonny.
Amy Sonny. That they asked me, when did you first meet Mike James? And I says, I won't forget it. I was...
I'm a little cautious here. What? Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, no. This is... greasers were street corner people. Hanging out in the corners or on the street corner or in parks. And at that particular moment, we were in a train station up in Edison Park, and in a way, we took over parks. Obviously, older people and even younger people didn't want to be around those hoodlums in the black leather jackets who were smoking cigarettes and maybe drinking beer. Well, one night, the door opens and in walks this big guy. And we thought, and this guy's got some cojones. He doesn't know us, but everybody around thinks we're very dangerous people. And indeed, there were some of the family there who had problems, let's say. But without fear, you walked in and started talking politics, which, again, a dangerous topic by itself. So that's how I got introduced. And, of course, you're passing out the newspaper, Rising Up Angry, and talking about real everyday problems that people face.
Well, Paul was one of many young guys who, and young women too, who certainly came over to the side of justice. And, before Rising Up Angry, I had worked in Uptown, and some of those young Southern guys who dressed the same way kind of had moved beyond racism and had started to move in a positive direction. Many of you who have listened to the show or have studied your history know about Joint Community Union and Peggy Terry, who ran for vice president with Eldridge Cleaver, and Studs Turkel had done a whole lot of information with her, a lot of interviews. Paul was one of those young guys, and it was years later that I ran into you, Paul, and you had made your move up to Green Bay, and you turned out to be a labor historian and an energy efficiency analyst and environmental historian. Tell me a little bit about Green Bay and the work that you did up there during the years you were there before you split for the West Coast.
Yes, the coast. Well, I went up to Green Bay because of a new university that was opened by the University of Wisconsin. I'm actually writing a book on it now called University of the Future. There was an attempt in the 60s to remodel education, higher education, because, well, two things. First of all, of course, students were highly dissatisfied, and they were rebelling at the Ivy League colleges and at the state colleges. A lot of this was related to Vietnam, but it was also just an alienation, like, you're not teaching about real life, and you're sitting there lecturing, and we're not learning anything. You really don't care about us. We're just a product. You remember those days. Okay, so this university was started as a branch of the Madison campus of the University of Wisconsin. And it was a laboratory of innovation, and I'd read about it. Not about this theoretical, we're trying to change society, but the things that they offered was real practical life education to train problem solvers. And so I journeyed from Oregon, where I was living at the time, and wound up in Green Bay at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. And I can go on and on about it, but
well, what I remember is that you got involved in a lot of environmental work. I mean, Green Bay, I think there's a river that goes into
okay. Well, this
goes into the lake, and there were a lot of environmental problems, and for a number of years, including I remember you did an article for the Heartland Journal, and
yes.
Tell us about the environmental work that you did and who you worked with.
Okay. I'll mention one last thing about the University of the Future is that they focus all studies from business department to sociology to art was about the environment. It was the first university dedicated to solving environmental problems, and this was 1969 when it opened its doors. This was before Earth Day. Well, of course, I studied the environment there, and because I'd grown up in Chicago and known as Studs Turkel with his tape recorder, going down Division Street interviewing, I got into conversations with some faculty, and I was asking them about the history of the river. Why are there no fish?
You had a tape recorder.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Paul actually does a lot of recording and taping of politically sensitive events.
Right. So anyway, to solve the problems in the community, we had to know the history of the community, but it hadn't been recorded. And at UWGB, they says, well, you go out and do it, solve the problem. So I went out and started collecting oral history, and I found a hidden side of history, just like Howard Zinn taught many of us that there's a part of American history you don't know, that you're not taught in the textbooks, not taught in the classrooms. That same thing is true on the local scale. And I found and encountered activists for the environment in Green Bay that were previously unknown popularly. They'd been the leaders of the community from the 1920s on, but they never made the official curriculum. They never were talked about. And when I started giving talks around the community about taking corporations to court for polluting back in the 40s, people says, where'd you get this? This sounds like you're making it up. And I says, no, it's not making it up. This is what happened, and here are the newspaper accounts, and here are the transcripts, and here are the people who were there. And so people were surprised, and they began to realize that they'd been told a narrative, told a story that wasn't true. And that created quite a bit of excitement and led to a creation of a big project called the Fox-Wolf Rivers Environmental History Project. So I can go on and on about that, but we did many educational activities to try to reacquaint people with their own community history. And it's probably the most successful thing I've ever done, because I've tried to persuade people, tried to show them charts and graphs and argue various points. You let people find out for themselves what the history is, they'll make the right decisions.